She took his scarred hand under the lamplight and said, "These aren't from work. So what are you hiding from?" The oil lamp flickers as she turns his wrist, slow and certain. His breath catches. Outside, wind scrapes against the walls, but inside the room feels smaller with every second. He tries to pull back. She doesn't let go. Her thumb traces one old mark like she's seen it before. And somehow, she already knows. So why did he ask for a woman who wouldn't question him? Tell me, would you stay or walk out that door? The afternoon light over Redstone Ridge had that thin, tired look it always carried at the end of a long day. Dust hung in the air around the small depot, like it didn't have the strength to settle. The boards of the platform creaked once when Ethan Cole shifted his weight, then went still again. He stood apart from the others. Not by accident. His coat was buttoned, though the heat hadn't quite broken yet. Hands buried deep in the pockets, shoulders set like he had been bracing against wind for years that never really stopped. A man like him didn't look like he was waiting for anything. Not really. But he was there all the same, eyes fixed on the bend in the road where the coach would appear. Folks in town knew him by sight. Most kept their distance. They said he lived out past the ridge where the land flattened into dry grass and rock, 2 miles out. No neighbors close enough to matter. They said he worked hard and spoke little, and never stayed long in town unless he had to. None of them knew what he had written in that letter. He hadn't used many words. He never did. No questions, no curiosity. A quiet woman who knew how to follow instruction. Someone who would not pry into a man's past. He had read the lines twice before sending them off, then folded the paper and sealed it like he was closing a door he did not intend to open again. The sound of wheels came before the coach showed itself. Slow at first, then clearer, grinding over the hard road. A few men near the hitching post turned their heads. Someone spat into the dirt. A dog barked once and stopped. Ethan did not move. The coach rolled in, red dust curling up around the wheels as it slowed. The driver pulled the reins, horses snorting, leather creaking. The door opened with a dull knock against the frame. A hand appeared first. Small, steady. Then the woman stepped down. Lila Monroe did not hesitate when her boots hit the ground. She adjusted the strap of the cloth bag on her shoulder with one smooth motion, then lifted her head. Her dress was plain, gray, worn from travel but clean. No jewelry. No extra cloth pinned for show. Just what she needed. Her eyes moved once across the depot, not searching, measuring. They settled on Ethan without pause. No surprise crossed her face. No relief either. Just a small nod, as if she had already decided that he was the man she would walk toward. Ethan straightened a fraction, something tightening in his chest without asking permission. He stepped forward when she did. They stopped an arm's length apart. "You're Lila Monroe," he said. His voice came out even, low, like he had practiced not letting anything slip through. "I am," she answered. Her voice wasn't soft. It wasn't hard either. It landed somewhere steady in between, like it had no reason to prove anything. He took the bag from her shoulder out of habit. Their hands brushed for the briefest moment. Her skin was cool, not from the wind, not from the shade. Just cool. He pulled his hand back without thinking. "We'll get this done," he said. She nodded again. No questions. The church sat at the far end of town, a small wooden building with a narrow steeple and a door that never quite closed flush against the frame. The boards creaked under their boots as they stepped inside. 3 people sat scattered along the benches, called in for witness more than presence. The preacher stood waiting, flipping a page in a worn book, as if he had done this same thing too many times to count. Ethan stood to the right, Lila to the left. No flowers, no ribbon, no music drifting through the rafters. only the sound of the wind slipping through the cracks and the preacher's voice reading words that had long since lost their weight. When Ethan gave his answer, it came quick, almost before the question settled. When the preacher turned to Lila, she did not speak right away. She paused. Not long, not enough to draw attention from anyone else in the room, but long enough for Ethan to feel it, a small space opening between them. Then she said, "I do." Flat, clear, no tremor. The paper was signed, ink pressed into dry parchment, names written like they belonged there. Then it was done. Outside, the light had shifted, the gold thinning into something cooler. Ethan started down the path without looking back. Lila followed, her steps falling into place behind his with quiet precision. They did not speak. The road out of town stretched in a narrow line of dust and rock, bending once near the old fence before opening toward the ridge. Ethan had walked it more times than he could count. He knew every dip in the ground, every loose stone that might turn under a boot. After a while, he noticed something. He slowed without meaning to. Lila did not stumble. She did not hesitate. Her steps matched the path, not like someone following, like someone remembering. At the bend near the split fence, she shifted slightly to the left before the ground dipped. He had not warned her, had not turned his head. Still, she stepped clean over it. Ethan stopped. She stopped with him. For a moment, neither of them moved. The wind brushed across the dry grass, carrying the faint smell of dust and distant rain that might or might not come. "You been out this way before?" he asked. He kept his eyes forward when he said it. "No," she answered. Nothing more. He turned then, just enough to look at her. Her face held steady. No flicker of uncertainty. No effort to explain. Just the same calm look she had worn stepping off the coach. He nodded once, though he wasn't sure why. They walked on. The ridge rose ahead, the outline of his house barely visible against the land beyond. The sky stretched wide over them, pale and empty. Ethan felt it settle in his chest then. A thin line of unease. He had asked for a woman who would not question him. What he had not asked for was a woman who already seemed to know where she was going. And as they climbed the last stretch toward the ranch, the quiet between them no longer felt empty. It felt like something waiting. The house stood where it always had, alone against the stretch of land, its boards weathered gray by years of sun and wind. A narrow porch ran along the front, one step sagging slightly where the wood had split, but never been fixed. The gate creaked when Ethan pushed it open, the hinge giving a low complaint that echoed farther than it should have. He walked ahead. Lila followed. The door gave way with a soft drag. Inside, the air held the smell of pine, cold ash, and something that hadn't been stirred in a long time. It was clean. Too clean. No stray cup left on the table, no jacket thrown over a chair, no sign that anyone lived there beyond the bare minimum required. Ethan stepped aside after crossing the threshold. "Inside," he said. Lila did not move right away. She stood in the doorway a moment longer than expected, letting the outside light fall across the floorboards. Her gaze moved slowly across the room. The table, the stove, the wall where a hook held a single coat. She stepped in without hurry, her boots making almost no sound against the wood. Her fingers brushed the edge of the table as she passed. Not lingering, just enough to feel it. Ethan watched from near the door, hands settling back into his pockets. He wasn't used to anyone moving through his space. Not like this. Not without asking. She stopped by the window. The glass had a faint crack near the corner, one he had noticed years ago and never bothered to fix. She touched the frame lightly, as if checking its shape. Then she turned toward the kitchen. The cabinet door opened with a quiet click. Ethan moved before he realized he had. One step forward. Then he stopped himself. She reached the lower shelf. 6 bottles of whiskey stood in a row, evenly spaced. Labels turned the same direction. Lila didn't take one out. She bent slightly, looked. Her lips moved once. No sound came. Ethan felt something tighten in his jaw. "That's nothing," he said. The words came out flat, too quick. She closed the cabinet. "Yes," she said. Nothing more. Evening settled without much notice. The light faded through the window until the room took on that soft gray color that comes just before night. Ethan stepped outside for a moment, checking the fence line out of habit, though there was nothing to check. When he came back in, the smell met him first. Something warm, simple, real. Lila stood by the stove, a pot set low over the flame. She had found the dried beans, the last of the salt pork, the small sack of cornmeal tucked in the back. The apron from the wall hung around her waist, tied neatly. She did not look up when he entered. He took a seat at the table, hands resting flat against the wood. The chair felt different under him, not because it had changed, because the room had. She placed a bowl in front of him. No question. "No, are you hungry?" He picked up the spoon. They ate in silence. Not the same silence as before. He felt her eyes move once or twice. Not staring, just noticing. Every time he shifted his hand, every time his gaze dropped. Halfway through the meal, he set the spoon down. "You don't have to do all this," he said. She wiped her hands on the cloth beside the stove, turned slightly. "I know." The answer settled between them. He looked at her then, longer than before. "You didn't ask where anything was," he said. "No. How'd you know?" She met his eyes for the first time since they had come inside. A beat passed. "You keep things where they make sense," she said. It sounded simple. It wasn't. Ethan leaned back in the chair, the wood creaking under his weight. He let out a slow breath. "You don't talk much," he said. "Neither do you." That almost made him smile. Almost. After supper, she gathered the bowls. He reached out to take one from her, but she shifted half a step to the side. Not avoiding him, not inviting him either. Just enough space. Water ran in the basin. The soft clink of dishes filled the room. Ethan stood there for a moment, unsure what to do with his hands. He turned toward the stairs. "Your room's upstairs," he said. "First door on the left." She dried her hands, looked at him. "And you don't go in there," she said. It wasn't a question. Ethan paused. "No." "Why?" He hesitated. Just long enough. "It's yours," he said. "You prepared it." "Yes." She stepped closer. Not enough to crowd him. Enough to make him aware of the distance closing. "Then why not enter it?" The air shifted. Ethan looked past her toward the door. "Doesn't matter," he said quietly. She held his gaze another second, then turned and walked toward the stairs. The boards creaked under her steps, slow, measured. At the top, she paused. For a moment, Ethan thought she had gone inside already. Then he noticed. She was standing just out of sight, watching. He looked down at his right hand. The scars were there, same as always. Faint lines crossing over older ones. He curled his fingers into a fist, then loosened them again. Above him, the floor shifted once. The house fell quiet. But it was not the kind of quiet he had known for 5 years. This one listened back, and for the first time since he had built this place to keep the world out, Ethan Cole had the feeling that something inside it had already begun to change. Night settled slow over Redstone Ridge. The wind softened, brushing along the walls like it knew not to push too hard. Inside, the lamp burned low on the table, its flame bending each time the draft slipped under the door. Ethan stayed in the kitchen longer than he needed to, He wiped the same spot on the table twice, checked the latch on the back door, poured water into a tin cup and left it untouched. The house felt different behind him. Not louder, not fuller, just aware. Footsteps came from upstairs. Light. Even. He straightened before he realized it. Lila appeared at the top of the stairs, one hand resting on the railing. The lamp below threw her shadow long across the wall behind her. She didn't lean, didn't hesitate. Just stood there, looking down. Ethan held her gaze for a moment, then looked away first. "You can turn in," he said. "Long day." She didn't move. A second passed, then another. "Upstairs," she said. Just that. Ethan frowned slightly. "That's your room." "I know." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't press. But it didn't leave space either. He hesitated, then stepped toward the stairs. Each step creaked under his weight. Familiar sounds. But tonight they seemed sharper, like the house was paying attention. At the landing, he stopped short of the doorway. The room was exactly as he had left it. Clean sheets, window cracked open, the faint smell of soap and wood. Lila stepped past him and set the lamp on the small table by the bed. The light shifted, catching the lines of her face. She turned then, standing a few feet away. Not close, not far. Ethan stayed near the door. "You don't have to," he started. She reached out. Not sudden, not forceful. Just enough. Her fingers closed lightly around his wrist. Ethan froze. He hadn't been touched like that in years. Not without warning. Not without reason. He could have pulled away. He didn't. She turned his hand upward. The lamplight fell across his palm. The scars showed clearly there, crossing lines, some faint, some deeper, old ones layered beneath newer ones that had barely settled. Lila didn't react right away. Her thumb moved once along a ridge near his knuckle. "Not work scars," she said. Ethan's jaw tightened. He pulled his hand back, but her grip held just enough to slow him. "You do this," she said quietly, "when no one sees." He stilled. The room seemed smaller all at once. "That's not," he started. He stopped. She let go. Ethan stepped back, shoulders drawn, breath shallow. "You don't know anything about me," he said. "I know what I see." Her eyes stayed on him. Not sharp, not soft, just steady. He turned away, one hand bracing against the wall. Silence stretched. "You wanted someone who wouldn't ask," she said. He let out a short breath. "That's right." "I'm not asking." That landed heavier than anything else. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, he didn't look at her. He walked to the chair by the bed and sat down, elbows on his knees, hands hanging loose between them. The words came slow at first. "She had a name," he said. "Margaret." Lila didn't move. 2 years, he went on. "We were set to marry. Folks already said it like it was done." His voice stayed even. Too even. "I came home early one day. Didn't make noise. Didn't think I had to." He paused. The lamp flickered once. She wasn't alone. The room held still around that. "I didn't say anything," he said. "Didn't ask, didn't fight. I just walked out." His fingers curled slightly. "Sold what I had in town. Took the land out here. Figured, less people, less chance of that happening again." Lila shifted then, not closer, just enough that her shadow moved along the floor. "And the rest?" she asked. Ethan let out a dry breath. "The rest," he said, is what you saw. Silence again. But it was different now. Not guarded. Just open. Lila looked at his hand again, the one resting between them. Then, slowly, she lifted her own sleeve. The skin along her wrist caught the light. Thin lines, pale against her skin. Not deep, but deliberate. Ethan's eyes fixed on them. She lowered her arm again. I learned to stop, she said, later than I should. No explanation, no story. Just that. Ethan leaned back in the chair, his chest rising deeper this time. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The wind brushed the window. The lamp burned low. Two people in the same room, no longer hiding the same way. Ethan looked at her then, really looked. Not at her dress, not at the space between them, at her. Something in his shoulders eased, just a fraction. Not gone, but not as tight as before. Lila turned slightly, sitting at the edge of the bed. Her hands rested in her lap. Still. Not waiting. Not pushing. Just there. Ethan let out a breath he hadn't noticed he'd been holding. The night stretched on, but for the first time in years, it didn't feel like something he had to get through alone. Ethan didn't remember lying down. At some point, the lamp burned lower. At some point, the wind eased off. The room held a quiet that didn't press against him the way it used to. He stayed sitting in the chair longer than he meant to, watching the way the light moved across the floorboards. Lila hadn't left. She sat on the edge of the bed, back straight, hand resting loosely in her lap. Not watching him. Not turning away either. Just there. That was the difference. Not trying to fix anything. Not asking him to be different. Just not leaving. He stood eventually, slow, like his body wasn't used to the motion anymore. Crossed the room and set the lamp down lower so the flame wouldn't burn itself out too fast. You should get some rest, he said. I will. She didn't move. He gave a short nod, then stepped past her and lay down on the far side of the bed. Not close, not touching. The mattress dipped under his weight and settled again. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then he felt it. The bed shift again. Lila lay down on the other side, leaving a small space between them. Not careful. Not distant. Just enough. Ethan stared at the ceiling. He could hear her breathing. Slow. Even. He didn't turn his head. But he didn't move away either. Morning came quiet. The light slipped in through the window, pale and thin at first, then stronger as it climbed. Ethan woke before the sun had fully cleared the ridge. For a moment, he didn't remember where he was. Then he felt the weight beside him. Still there. He turned his head slightly. Lila lay on her side, facing the window, one arm bent under her head. Her hair had come loose in the night, a few strands resting across her cheek. She didn't look like someone passing through. She looked like she belonged to the room. Ethan sat up slowly. The floor was cold under his boots. He stepped outside without waking her, out onto the porch where the air still held the edge of night. The fence line stretched out ahead, pale under the early light. He leaned against the post. For years, mornings had felt the same. Quiet. Empty. Something to get through before the work began. This one didn't. He didn't know what to call it. Just different. Behind him, the door opened. He didn't turn right away. Lila stepped out onto the porch, tying her hair back with a strip of cloth she must have found inside. She didn't ask where anything was, didn't ask what came next. She stood beside him, close enough that he could feel her presence, not touching. They stayed that way a moment. The sun edged over the ridge, light spilling across the grass in long, low lines. Ethan pushed himself off the post. Fence needs checking, he said. South side took wind last week. She nodded once. I'll come. No hesitation. They walked out together, boots damp with the last of the morning dew. The ground sloped slightly near the creek, the soil still holding a bit of last season's softness. At the fence line, Ethan crouched to check a loose post. The wire had come free where the staple had worked loose from the wood. He reached for the hammer hanging from his belt. Before he could pull it free, Lila stepped in. She picked up the wire, held it steady. Not asking, just doing. Ethan paused a second, then set the staple back in place and hammered it down. The sound carried across the open land. They worked like that for a while. No instruction, no correction, just small movements falling into place beside each other. When they reached the far end near the old barn, Ethan slowed. The structure leaned slightly to one side, boards worn darker near the base. The door hung crooked on its hinge, one side lower than the other. He stopped there. Lila didn't ask why. She followed his gaze. Inside, the light didn't reach far, just enough to show the outline of stalls, the old tack hanging on the wall, and in the far corner, the post. It stood apart from the rest, thicker, darker. Ethan stepped inside first. The air was cooler in there. Dust floated where the light cut through the cracks in the wall. He didn't go all the way in, just far enough. Lila walked past him this time. Her steps slowed near the post. She reached out. Her hand rested against the wood. The marks were there, faint in some places, deeper in others. Not fresh, not recent, but not hidden either. She didn't pull her hand away. Ethan watched her, didn't speak, didn't explain. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind slipping through the gaps in the boards. Then Lila turned her head slightly, not looking at him fully. "No more," she said. Quiet. But it didn't sound like a question. Ethan stood still. Something moved in his chest. Not sharp, not sudden, just shifting. He looked at the post again, then at her hand still resting there. For the first time, he didn't feel the need to turn away from it. He stepped closer, close enough to stand beside her, not touching, but not apart either. And in that small, still space inside the old barn, with dust hanging in the light and the past standing plain between them, Ethan Cole understood something he hadn't let himself think before. Whatever had followed him out here wasn't something he had to carry alone anymore. The barn stayed quiet after that. Dust hung in the air, turning slow in the narrow light. Lila's hand remained on the post a moment longer, then fell back to her side. She didn't step away first. She didn't need to. Ethan looked at the marks again. He had passed this spot 100 times, maybe more. Some days he avoided it. Other days he stood right here, staring at it until the light ran out and the cold settled in. Now it looked different, not smaller, just finished. He turned and walked out of the barn. Lila followed, her steps even behind him. They didn't speak on the way back to the house. The wind had picked up again, dragging along the dry grass in a low, steady sound that filled the space between them. Inside, the kitchen held the same quiet it always had. The table, the stove, the cabinet by the wall. Ethan stopped in front of it. His hand hovered near the handle. For a second, it didn't move. Then he pulled the door open. 6 bottles sat in a line, amber catching what little light came through the window. He reached in and took the first one out. The glass felt familiar in his hand, too familiar. Lila didn't say a word. She stepped closer, not touching, just there. Ethan turned toward the back door. "Come on," he said. Outside, the ground was hard where the sun hit it most. A flat stone lay a few yards from the porch, worn smooth from years of weather. He walked to it and stopped. The bottle stayed in his hand. For a moment, he just looked at it. Then he threw it. The glass shattered clean against the stone. The sound carried out across the open land, sharp and sudden. A few birds lifted from the fence line and disappeared into the sky. Ethan stood still. His chest rose once, then again. "Another," he said. Lila stepped back inside, came out with the second bottle and placed it in his hand. Not fast, not slow, just steady. He threw it harder this time. Another crack, another burst of glass. They worked through them one by one. Each bottle passed from her hand to his, each one breaking against the same stone. The third, the fourth. By the fifth, his grip had tightened enough to turn his knuckles pale. He hesitated. Lila didn't rush him. The wind shifted, brushing past them both. "Give it to me," he said quietly. She did. Their fingers touched for a moment longer this time. Not by accident, not pulled away. He threw it. The last bottle stayed in her hand. She looked at it, then at him. "This one," she said, her voice low. "You kept the longest." Ethan let out a breath that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than the rest. "Yeah." She placed it in his hand. He didn't throw it right away. He turned it once, watching the light move through the glass. Then he drew his arm back and sent it forward. The bottle broke, and that was it. No more left to reach for. They stood there a while after. The ground was scattered with glass, catching the late light in small, bright pieces. The wind moved through it, soft and constant. Ethan's shoulders dropped, not all at once, just enough. Lila stood beside him, close enough that if he shifted, he would touch her. She didn't move away. He turned slightly, looked at her. She held his gaze. No questions. No praise. Just the same steady presence she had carried since the moment she stepped off the coach. They went inside when the light began to fade. Evening settled without much ceremony. The stove burned low. The room held a warmth it hadn't known before, not from the fire, from the fact that it was shared. Lila moved through the house without asking, not searching anymore, just knowing. Ethan stood near the table, watching. She went upstairs. He followed a minute later. The door to her room stood open. He stopped in the hallway, looked inside. The bed was made. The window cracked the same way, everything as it had been. But it didn't feel like it belonged to her anymore. He stepped back. By the time he turned, she had already crossed the hall, into his room. Her bag rested against the wall where there had been nothing before. She set a few small things on the table. Folded cloth. A comb. Nothing more. Ethan stood in the doorway. Didn't say a word. Didn't need to. She didn't ask. That was the difference. Night came. They lay down again. Not careful this time. Not measured. Just two people in the same space. The distance between them smaller than before. Sometime in the night, he woke. Didn't know why. The room was dark, but not empty. He could feel her there. Hear her breathing. Steady. Real. He closed his eyes again. Morning came soft. Light slipped through the curtain, settling across the bed. Ethan opened his eyes. Lila was already awake, looking at him, not watching. Just there. He pushed himself up, sat on the edge of the bed. She did the same. No hurry, no need. They stepped outside together. The porch boards creaked under their weight. The air carried that early chill, the kind that faded quick once the sun cleared the ridge. They stood side by side. The land stretched out ahead of them, open, waiting. Lila rested her hands on the railing. "We plant tomorrow?" she said. Ethan looked out across the field, then back at her. He nodded. Tomorrow. That was all. No promise, no vow, just something simple, something they would build together. If you stood on that porch with them, with the wind brushing past and the land stretching farther than you could see, you might feel it too. That quiet moment where nothing is promised, and yet something real has already begun. Because sometimes, life doesn't give you a clean start. It gives you pieces. Old pain. Mistakes that linger longer than they should. Nights you don't talk about. And you carry them so long, you forget what it feels like to set them down. Ethan didn't find someone to fix him. Lila didn't come to be saved. They just stayed. Stayed when it was easier to turn away. Stayed when the truth wasn't easy to hear. Stayed long enough for the silence to mean something different. And maybe that's the part that matters. Not grand gestures, not perfect love, just someone who stands beside you when you're still learning how to stand yourself. So if you've ever carried something you thought no one could understand, or if you've ever wondered what it might feel like to finally let it go, maybe their story isn't so far from yours. Tell me, what would you have done, standing where Ethan stood? And if stories like this stay with you a little longer than most, there are more waiting just beyond this one. Quiet stories, real ones, the kind you don't rush through. You're always welcome to come back and walk a little farther.